Today I want to talk to you about my love of crochet and how miniature crochet can really enhance a doll's house, adding a warm, cosy feel and a splash of colour to any room or miniature scene. I learned to crochet in full size when I was about 11 years old. My sister taught herself from a magazine article. It would have been an old woman magazine back in the mid-80s, I think, and in turn she taught me how to do it. And I loved it straight away. Up until then I'd always knitted, but I always found it quite a painstaking process and could never quite get the tension right, so my stitches were always too tight and squeaking along the needle. But crochet I loved right from the start. I found it so much easier and quicker too, and I could actually envision myself making a blanket for my bed out of squares that wasn't going to take me forever. And I've loved it ever since. But I didn't bring it into my miniature hobby for quite a while, and I'm not sure why. I think I made a bed, one of my early 12th scale beds, and I just suddenly thought, I wonder if I could make a small blanket to go on here. So I went online and I found what I thought was a really small hook, but it was actually a 1mm hook, so a little bit too big for 12th scale. But I had a go anyway, and I used, it was a crochet thread but not a cotton. It was more like a really thin wool, and I could only do 2 rounds of the traditional granny square to make it fit on this bed that I'd made, but at the time I thought it was wonderful. And then as I progressed in the hobby, I learned that there was this whole range of tiny crochet hooks out there and lovely crochet cotton, and my work just sort of got smaller and smaller until it became what it is today. Okay, so I want to show you this crochet box that I made where I keep all of my tools, and I was using a plastic sort of storage container. Wasn't as big as this and it wasn't as deep either, so it was okay, but just everything was on top of everything else, so I couldn't see all of the coloured threads that I had, and my work in progress was on top of the little box that I kept all my needles in, so I'd have to move all that to get to the needles, and it just wasn't working. So I decided to build my own. So it was fairly easy to make. I've used the same process I would use to make a drawer for a piece of doll's house furniture, something like that. So I've made the base for the lid and the base piece by gluing together, well, 3.5 sort of sheets of wood there to get the thickness that I wanted, and then I've added on the side panels and the front and back panels to get the height for the lid and the base. And then I used a 1.5mm thick sheet wood to create the sections that I want inside, and I'll show you those in a moment, but also this lip around the outside edge so that I've got a nice lip there and the lid fits on nice and tightly. Now I haven't stained it or anything yet, but I think what I'm actually going to do is use a contact paper just to make it really nice and durable. Right, let's have a look inside. Okay, so in these 2 sections here, I've got all of the sort of main threads, and I've just divided those roughly into colour schemes. And then in this piece up here, I keep the lighter colours, and I always buy the white and the ecru in these 20-gram sized balls. These balls are 5 grams, and the white and the ecru, which is like a sort of lovely cream, come in the 20-gram size, and I wish the black did too, because I use quite a lot of black in the traditional style sort of granny square blankets where I make a multicolour square and then line it in the black. So whenever I'm planning to make one of those, I always sort of order a couple of rolls of the black, and that will work as the outline for a blanket of up to probably about 35 round granny squares. So always make sure you order enough for your main colour. One ball won't do it if you're doing a blanket of more than 20 squares. So always make sure you order a couple of balls there. And then over here is my variegated threads. Keep those all separate. And I really love these. These are like the mixed colour threads. Really love this pink one. And I use these for making my flower squares. The flower looks lovely if you do it in one of these variegated threads. And this lovely blue one here I used as water when I made a water lily blanket, which I did as a tutorial for a magazine. And that's really beautiful. And I think they do about 10 shades in those variegated ones. Blues through pinks through greens, the purples as well. And they just look beautiful within a blanket. So that's those. My work in progress section here, which is really handy, a lovely large area where I can lay everything out. This one's nearly done, and this is going to be a sort of patchwork style blanket with a black edging. And then up here I keep my hooks and my scissors. I love these scissors. Got a couple of pairs of those, keep one in my embroidery bag as well. And I've also got a little pin cushion there and some pins. Now, some sewing needles. And what I use those for is sort of sewing in the final thread. When I do the final round around the outside of the blanket, I'll stitch in the thread. But as I go along, I just snip them off. Let me show you on this one. Now, a lot of people say if you just snip them off, doesn't it unravel? But I've never found it to unravel. I think you're quite safe just snipping the threads as short as you can, just being really careful not to sort of cut through your work as you're doing it. And I think that looks neat enough for the back of a blanket. But if you are a bit of a perfectionist and you'd rather sew them in, then just leave a longer tail when you start and finish each round, and then you'll have enough to thread through your needle and stitch it into the back. But I must say that as I'm going along, I do work the ends behind the stitches where I can, and then still trim them off, but it just means that you've got a little bit more length, but it's just hidden behind the stitches. So it's up to you, and also stitching them into the back takes a long time. So if you're doing it, do it as you go along, because it's a very sort of long-winded process if you leave it until you've finished the whole blanket and then going through and stitching them all in. But like I say, when I do that final round around the blanket, once I've finished it, I will stitch in the long thread into the back, because otherwise when you finish the blanket that will be sticking out and you'll always see it, so that's a bit annoying. So do always stitch in that final thread. And then in here I have a range of hooks going from the smallest one that I have, which is a 0.4 millimeters, and that's a size 24. Let me just check that. I think with all needles, the higher the number, the finer they are. Yes, so it's the same with these. So the 0.5 millimeter, and that's the width of the little hook bit, is a number 22. And a 0.4, so smaller, is a number 24. So the higher the number, the finer the hook size. And I think that works with all needles, doesn't it? Knitting needles and sewing needles as well. So the one I use mostly is my 0.5 hook. And I'm going to show you some squares now as comparisons of the different size hooks. And as you can see, they actually go up in 2 millimeter increments. So it's not a great deal, but 2 millimeters in 12th scale is a lot smaller. So the 0.4 millimeter hook will give you a 5 round square that measures 21 millimeters. So that's just over 3/4 of an inch. And then it goes up, like I say, in 2 millimeter increments. So I would say if you're using a larger hook, like a 0.75 or a 1 millimeter hook, then just do less rounds on the square, just to make the squares a little bit smaller. As a general rule, the smaller the hook, the more to scale your work is going to be. But having said that, it's got to be an enjoyable process. If you're sort of struggling with the smaller hook, or it's difficult to see, then you know, change your hook size, go up a size, because otherwise it's not going to be enjoyable, and you just won't stick at it. That's what I found anyway. So I do use a 0.4mm hook for some of my work, but I do have to wear my reading glasses when I'm using that, and I really have to concentrate a lot more than when I'm using the 0.5mm hook. So I'm comfortable with the 0.5, so you do have to be comfortable with whichever hook you're using. And then moving over to this little corner down here, this is my sort of end of rolls. So whenever I've used the cotton and I start to see the cardboard tube, I just stick it in this little corner one, and then I use all these up for my sort of mixed coloured blankets. So I use all these little end bits for these. And you'll be surprising how far a tiny bit of cotton will go to. You'll think you've got a tiny bit left, you might as well throw it away, but you could probably get a middle out of it. So do always try before you sort of get rid of the end of a roll, because you might find that you can use it just for the middles. So they're all in there. And then over in this corner here, I've got a little bin. So I just used to have like a little plastic pot in my other box that I'd put all my sort of threads in to be thrown away. So I made this little box, and then once that gets sort of full, I can just empty that out, and it saves you just sort of putting them on the coffee table or on the arm of your sofa as you're working, and that just slots in there. So the thread I use is a DMC thread, and it's called Special Dentelles, and again it comes in different thicknesses. I use a number 80. Again, that's one that I'm comfortable crocheting with, but it does come in, well, I think it starts at about a 40, which again, with the number in, is thicker, and it goes up to 100, which is slightly finer than this one and more like a sewing cotton. So I find unless you're using a really small hook, it looks quite baggy when you make up the square. So again, I'm happy with the number 80 thread and a 0.5 or number 22 hook, and I think that works really well. Now this particular cotton comes in 72 shades. I think, like I said before, that includes 10, I think it's 10, I'll check in a moment, variegated threads, and then the rest are these lovely solid colours. And then one thing that I've done that I find really useful is to make up my own colour chart. Now it's just stuck in the lid here temporarily for now because I want to redo it. It's getting a bit raggy where I've sort of been pulling it in and out. But basically what I did was went online and I downloaded the colour chart and printed that off. Now the colours you see on screen, or indeed on the chart when you print it off, aren't actually the true colours of the cotton. So what I've then done is I've gone through each one and just done a few stitches of that colour whenever I sort of get it into stock. So as soon as I get a new roll, I do a few stitches on here, and then eventually I've got all of them. But like I say, I want to redo it. But it's a really good way of keeping track of what colours you've used, and colour matching as well. So you might want to match a blanket to the bedding scheme, or even the wallpaper or a rug in the room that you're making the blanket for, or cushions, or whatever you're making. And this is a really good way then of checking the colours before you actually order and making sure that you're getting the right colours. The traditional granny square blanket would have been made with utility in mind rather than design. Wools of different thicknesses and textures in a mishmash of colours would have been used to crochet the squares and stitch them together. Today we can place appearance above utility, and with so many wonderful shades of cotton available, create some beautiful designs. An awful lot of people say to me that they've had a go at miniature crochet but just can't do it. And I totally understand that, because even if you can crochet in full size, going down to such a small hook and fine cotton can be quite fiddly. It can be really tricky. But my best advice to you would be work your way down the hook sizes. So whatever hook you work with in real life, your real life crochet, maybe go down a few sizes and then just get smaller and smaller and smaller. You will get there in the end. If you can crochet, I promise you, you will be able to do it. Especially start in the middle, as people say to me, is really tricky. But everything is just practice, and I know that if you just persevere, you'll be able to do it. And I really would encourage you to try that, because it is such a rewarding hobby. I sell my crochet throws, but they do take an awful long time to make. So a 24 square blanket will take me 9 hours to complete. Now, I'd never sit and make one from beginning to end. I'd never work solidly through for 9 hours, but overall it would take 9 hours. And the price that I charge for them isn't anywhere near or close to a day's working wage even. So it really is a labour of love, but I just enjoy making them. I'd make one for every room of my doll's house if I could. In fact, I probably will, having said that. But I really, really do encourage you to keep trying and just work your way down those hook sizes. And if you make something a bit larger than 12th scale, it's not going to be wasted. Like I said before, use fewer rounds in your granny squares. Make a smaller square. Even if it's only 2 or 3 rounds, it will still make a really nice blanket. If you're using a hook maybe of 1 or even 1.5 millimeters, you might have a friend that works in 1/6 scale, so that would be a really nice sized blanket to give to them as a gift. But I just can't encourage you enough to just have a go, because they really, really do enhance your doll's house. They look beautiful on the end of a bed or over the back of a couch or a sofa. So please do have a go. Now, I really hope you've enjoyed part 2 of my vlog. Do leave a comment below and let me know if you're going to have a go at miniature crochet, or if you've had a go before, let me know that you're going to have another try after watching this video. And also, what I'd be interested to know is what sort of skills or techniques that you do in real life or real size have you started to use in your miniature work? I think that would be really interesting. Like I said at the beginning, I didn't start using miniature crochet until I was quite far into my sort of hobbying, and I don't know why it never occurred to me until sort of a few years in. So like I said, just be really interested to know what skills you've developed in your real life that you now use in your miniature world. So thank you once again for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you soon.